Hey everyone, it's Jonathan and welcome back to Every Version Ever. Today I'm joined by Sarah for kind of a different episode. Today we're not talking about an adaptation of a book, we're talking about a book. While I was researching for my series on Washington Irving adaptations, I came across one of his lesser-known works, Old Christmas. I was hoping it was something that had been adapted for screen so we could talk about it, but it had not. However, the history I was reading about the book made me interested enough that I decided we should do a podcast about it anyway. This episode will be the finale of our Washington Irving series, but the beginning of our Christmas series, which will be different than usual this year, in more ways than one, as evidenced by our kicking off the series talking about an obscure book by Washington Irving. So this one's going to be a little bit different, because we're not talking about a movie, we're talking about a book, and I've kind of thought about dedicating episodes to books in the past. I just haven't ever gotten around to it. But with this one, I was already looking into Washington Irving, and I had already decided I was going to lump Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle into one series since they were so often paired together. But then I was wondering, I wonder if there's anything else he's done that has been adapted enough times that I could include it in the series. And so far it seems like he hasn't. It seems like Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle, at least from what I can find, they're the only stories he wrote that have been put onto screen.
I wonder if anybody did anything. I was reading about his prairie sketches, but maybe not.
I never found anything about that. But if anybody knows about anything that he's written that has been adapted, let us know.
Please do.
But anyways, while I was researching all that, I came across Old Christmas, and from the descriptions I was seeing, I was thinking, this sounds great. I hope somebody adapted this so we can talk about it on the podcast. And it seemed like a good story to cover with you.
I was definitely, it definitely seemed like it was up my alley.
Mm-hmm. But then I couldn't find any adaptations. And as far as I can tell, it's never been adapted for screen. I feel like it would make for a good, BBC Christmas special.
It came around Jane Austen's era.
Mm-hmm.
And it has the right flavor to be adapted to something like that. That would make such a good PBS Christmas special if they did it right.
Yeah.
And they really could, because there's a little romance in there. And they could just twist it around and make a thing.
Yeah.
So, you heard it from us first, if anybody gets on that.
Yeah, because it didn't seem like something that would be adapted for a big screen Hollywood feature. It's too quiet for that, I felt like. But a BBC or PBS or both.
Absolutely.
They do things together.
The crunch of the drive, the peacock in the distance.
Peacock pie.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
But anyways, even though this has never been adapted for screen, it doesn't technically fit into the theme of this podcast, I figured, why not? Let's talk about it anyways. I thought it was interesting. I like talking about obscure things. And
this is one of the joys of the internet. We're bringing, I had never heard about this, even though I grew up with old things. And and had me dig deeper into Washington Irving, and most people, I don't know if they're even going to know the name at this point. They're going to know Rip Van Winkle and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, at least somewhat, but
they'll probably know his name from that, but they probably won't know anything else. I didn't realize anything else that he'd written, and they probably won't even know that this Old Christmas originally came from the same, not the book-ish. He wrote a series of essays and stories that were all published under the name The Sketchbook of Jeffrey Crayon, which that sounds silly, but I don't think crayon was a little kid thing back then. But all of that was from the same thing. It was released over a period of time before it was bound together as one and then split up again as different things. But this originally was part of The Sketchbook of Jeffrey Crayon.
Basically a series of essays.
Yes, and stories. But I thought it was interesting that this was originally in the same thing that Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle were in.
Very nice. Now I want to know how old crayons are, so I'm looking real quick. The notion to combine a form of wax with pigment goes back thousands of years. This is probably going to take too long. Anyway, okay, so what year did those come out?
It was over, I believe, like 1819 to 1820. And this particular set of essays or stories were published on January 1st, 1920. Like all 5 of them were published at the same time.
1820?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to mention something that most people aren't going to know, and that is that Washington Irving was cute. He was a good-looking guy, and I never knew what he looked like. You know the name, and he rubbed elbows with he lived. Okay, he met George Washington. He was named after George Washington, and he met him when he was a kid. Let's see, what else? Edgar Allan Poe came to him for his advice about his writing. There are all of these. If you start digging into his life, I mean, I suppose Forrest Gump comes to mind, even though I've never watched that, and you can't make me. But it's very interesting crossroads of history. There's the thing of, there's the historical side, and then there's just the cozy side of this story. Because one of the things that really intrigued me about this is you said Charles Dickens was inspired to write A Christmas Carol because of this.
Yeah, and apparently not just that, like all of his Christmas writing was kind of inspired by this. And like I have not read it, but different people online were kind of alleging that there was at least a section of the Pickwick Papers that was very similar to Old Christmas.
I can see how this would be inspiring because you basically have a foreigner coming over to your country and talking about how wonderful the traditions are and the warmth of companionship at Christmas time. It's an interesting progression because, let's back up the bus a little bit. What was Washington Irving doing in England anyway? Did you read about this?
Well, I read about what he was doing when he wrote these specific stories, but I didn't read further than that. I was just mainly reading about Old Christmas.
So, as somebody who enjoys history, I have my blind spots. There's so much history, and I didn't... Okay, don't hate me, but if you're a history buff out there, but I didn't realize that the War of 1812 was extremely hard on American merchants. And it was really hard on Washington Irving's family. He wasn't married, but like his family suffered business-wise because of the war. And that's why he went over to England to somehow help his family financially. And I was reading through all of this history, and I can't give you a good PBS documentary style on what was happening with that. But he ended up spending 17 years of his life in England. And it's interesting, if you are a creative, whether musically or a writer, read about the life of Washington Irving. This person who contributed, he did so much, he knew such famous people, he's a wonder. And the things that people said about him, like, we expected better things, and thinking that he'd probably become too British from being over there, you know, and it's like the put downs that he received, even with everything that he accomplished in his life. So if people are being nasty towards you, it doesn't mean that you aren't brilliant. But he would have been kind of later 30s, probably around your age, that this was coming out, because he was born in 1783, I believe.
Yeah, it would have been close to my age.
Yes, and side note, he never married. I found out that he had a 17-year-old fiancée that died, And then later on, he was interested in somebody else who didn't return his affections. And then there was somebody else who was actually famous. The author of Frankenstein was interested in him, but I don't think he returned her affections. And, yeah, no, there's so much packed into his life. So yeah, he never married, and that he would have definitely been free to travel around and have these experiences. Probably more so anyway. But yeah, I also wanted to, and we can dig into the story. Do we want to start in, because I have a couple of things I want to insert this, but I can always insert it into the storyline.
Well, I was going to talk about like where this story came from, because I guess it was during this time when, probably after the War of 1812, because I couldn't find an exact date as to when this particular event took place, but sometime during his travels he stayed in Aston Hall in Birmingham, England, and then from that trip he was inspired to write this fictionalized account of what he experienced there. So like, this is, I don't want to say it's like semi-autobiographical, but something similar to what is in this book is what he experienced, but I think he played it up, because other things that I was reading talked about him using something called the Vindication of Christmas as like a guide to old English Christmas traditions. And I had to look that up too, because I knew that Christmas had been banned in America, like the Puritans had banned Christmas, but I didn't realize that it had also been banned for a while in England too. And that ban in England led to someone named John Taylor in 1653 writing a pamphlet entitled The Vindication of Christmas.
So is this story basically some of his experience but zhuzhed up a bit?
I think so.
Which I think he maybe did elsewhere in his writings too. Probably far more than I'm giving credit, because I was reading about that.
Mm-hmm. But this Vindication of Christmas sort of, I guess, personified Christmas, like to argue on behalf of the customs of the olden days, and basically say it's the people's right to celebrate Christmas with games and food and drink and family get-togethers.
What he drew from.
Yeah. So in sometime around 1653 was during a time that Christmas was banned in England, and this guy wrote about what they used to do, and it, like, this is our right. So Washington Irving used that along with what he experienced to come up with this old Christmas story.
I've done some reading about the banning of Christmas, I believe, and I can totally see how it would happen, because when Catholicism came in, they were trying to do the whole switcheroo of, okay, you have your pagan festival, but let's turn it into a Christian festival, and Jesus was probably born in the spring. But one of the things I would recommend for a really positive and brief take on that history is Rick Steves' European Christmas special, because he talks about different Christmas traditions and what they meant then and what they mean now, and has all of these snippets from different countries, and the little kids in Norway delivering goodies to the elderly. I mean, it's precious. You have Italy, you have England, Norway, France, I think somewhere up in the Swiss Alps or something. It is one of the coziest things you can watch at Christmas time. Yeah, definitely recommend. So, if you want to read this cozy story and fold in even more snippets of Christmas tradition, that's a nice place to go.
But anyways, apparently by Irving's time, Christmas was kind of not really celebrated. Like, some people did celebrate it. Apparently, like, Pennsylvania German settlers were like the main group that was like the enthusiastic celebrators of Christmas. I don't know why them specifically, but they must have carried their traditions from Germany.
So what was everybody else doing?
They kind of just didn't celebrate too much. Like, it was there, because I know that there was some like maybe some get-togethers, but it wasn't really a thing to celebrate Christmas. And I hadn't ever really known why, because I remember reading things as a kid, people talking about like Christmas wasn't really that popular. But I didn't realize at the time that it had to do with it being banned by the Puritans. And it kind of just fell out of favor. And then when it was unbanned, people kind of didn't care anymore. So it wasn't that popular.
I remember a program with, they invited this historian to the reenactment that they were doing. He said something wonderful that I won't be able to quote properly, but he talked about the traditions of feasting at midwinter. So whether that was pagan, Christian, whatever, to help people not die of depression in the wintertime. And I think that is the common sense takeaway. Whatever you are doing in the winter, find some way to be with others, whether through charity. This should probably be the finishing statement, but find some way to be with others, whether through charity or maybe find other people that aren't going to be able to get together with others, and see, can you form your own little odd temporary family or just something, because wintertime is gloomy, especially where we live. It's gloomy enough and hard enough without isolating, and people very much need people. Okay, tiny sermon. Moving forward.
Well, I don't know, like, I didn't read the full Vindication of Christmas, but, like, just a cursory glance over it and then a little bit of what Washington Irving believed about Christmas, I think that might have been sort of his driving force, or at least played into it a little bit, just wanting people to get together. I don't know that he would have phrased it anyway, like, just wanting people not to die of depression, but I think that might have just played into it, like his beliefs about Christmas a little bit.
Of wanting people to have good fellowship.
Yeah.
That's very present in this writing, and when it starts out, he is a solitary traveler, and I think he starts to feel a little bit like he's enjoying listening to the schoolboys that are heading home, but eventually he's by himself and starting to feel it when he comes across an old friend or an old acquaintance and gets folded into their celebration. So even though he has no family, he gets folded in. And I think that's one of the nice things that you can take away from this essay.
Mm-hmm.
Side note, Jane Austen reference, she died in 1817 and this was published in 1820. So it's pretty contemporary with that. If you want to get a feel for how people would have been dressing and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because this does take place in Europe.
He even had that swiffy hairdo that men had. If you've watched a Jane Austen movie and it's like they've pushed their hair forward, it's still short, but it's swift forward, if that makes sense. You know, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about, I hope. But if you look at an old painting of Washington Irving, he had that. When are we going to bring it back? We've already brought back the rat tail. The place that he goes to, where he's talking about like antiquated landscaping that the old gentleman is fond of.
Bracebridge Hall.
Yeah.
And the real place was Ashton Hall.
Okay. Do they have like Tudor style landscaping? Do you know?
I don't know. I looked at a couple pictures, but I searched Ashton Hall, and the first result is an online fitness coach who wears little shorts and is very buff and muscly.
Well, bless you, wherever you are. Not quite what we were thinking.
Oh, it's Aston Hall. I must have typed my notes up wrong. No wonder it came up incorrect. Well, I've got it both ways in my notes. I was not typing very well, I guess.
Jane Austen was 41 when she died. Isn't that nuts? I mean, I know what happens, but I didn't realize she was so young when she passed. She certainly made her mark in that time. Dang it.
I've got some pictures up here of Aston Hall.
I'm coming around. I'm probably not knowledgeable enough to be able to identify anyone. Ooh, that's a cool hall.
Technically, we could visit it because it's open for tours. It's now functioning as a museum, I believe.
I like how nonchalantly you said that.
I mean, if we had money and could get across the ocean.
Once we get our passports and just have about 10K laying around and a couple of weeks to blow, we'll just pop on over to Aston. Honestly, it could totally happen. I mean, other strange things happen in life. Why not? Well, it's a lovely place, and if he got to stay there, he's a lucky boy. Love the wood flooring. So, this essay coming out in 1820, A Christmas Carol came out in 1843. I wonder, yeah, I could see this being inspiring. Yeah, it's...
But he directly has said that it was an inspiration to him. I think at one point he was trying to meet with them. I don't remember if I read that they did meet up or not.
Really?
But he read it and he loved it. It apparently was like very popular in both the US and in England.
Good.
And it's hard to tell because like I think it's mostly people just kind of speculating, but it seems that the publication of Old Christmas is maybe, if not directly, then indirectly responsible for the revival of Christmas customs in America.
So American writer talking about British Christmas and it made its way over and they're like, well, dang, that sounds nice.
Yeah.
Because he's talking about all this cozy family time and all this singing and people dancing and getting dressed up and costumes for some reason. Don't know why. But
eating peacock pie.
Even though it was pheasant pie. It was pheasant. So what I wanted to say about that, well, there were at least two more things I wanted to say. But as far as the peacock pie, they seem to be, if you're going for old Christmas, that reminds me of a Tudor feast that has Ruth Goodman and probably Alex Langland and Peter Ginn. If you're into those British reenactments on YouTube, please go find it, because they talk about, how people used to eat swan and, oh shoot, did they have a dish that they lit on fire? It might have even been a peacock with like fire in its mouth. So
that sounds familiar. It's been a couple weeks since I read this, but that sounds like something that I read.
think I had you watch that with me one time, actually. I might have.
I feel like was it part of this book? Or maybe it was something I was reading about this book, because I was looking into like stuff that they were eating.
A Tudor feast is like...
something about fire, like in a mouth of a creature.
Okay. But on YouTube, you can find it in 4 parts. It was probably, I don't know, somebody bootlegged it from the BBC or something. I don't know. Nobody seems to be getting in trouble for it, so hopefully it's fine. Yeah, it's very interesting. They're making the gelatin from pig's feet, and I'm not making this sound really good, but if you're like me, maybe it already sounds great. But if you want to see them lighting the fire the old way, all the odd dishes that they're making dessert the really, really hard way, and showing the social order and laying out how the tables are laid out, and it's just so interesting. If it has Ruth Goodman, you're in a good place as far as historical reenactment. Her enthusiasm and attention to detail and everything is just fantastic. So definitely, this and Rick Steves I'm already recommending as companions to this. Also, so it's like, for him, modern day times, looking back hundreds of years at these oddball customs. Another historical tie-in to give you an idea is you have this young man who is with the family, and a 17-year-old girl obviously has it bad for him, and he returns her feelings. But one of his points of appeal is that he fought in the Battle of Waterloo. So that was 1815. So War of 1812 drives him to come here for financial reasons, and then Battle of Waterloo is 1815. Death of Jane Austen is 1817. This is published in 1820. A really interesting convergence of events.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know there was so much crossover with his life.
I mean, can you meet George Washington as a kid? He was like 6 years old or something.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that as being a possibility.
So, what else do we want to say about this?
We could talk a little bit about the story. There's not as much of a story as I kind of expected going in.
I hesitated to start listening to this because I thought it was going to be a ghost story. And I was like, okay, if it's late, I'm just not really in the right headspace. It is not a ghost story at all. I mean, it talks about the superstitions about a ghost in there, but it's not scary. One of the interesting things that I noticed, or you can't help but notice, one of the interesting points of the story is a moment where basically the preacher, they don't call him the preacher, and the squire, yes?
I think so.
Are talking about their youth, and he's noticing how time has affected them both, the paths that they chose in life, and how much better off the one is from the other. But the remembrance of youth, I think, brought more life to the one who wasn't doing as well with the passage of time and life choices.
Mm.
Who knows, maybe that inspired Charles a little bit too. But it was nothing super... It's kind of melancholy, but not as harsh as Scrooge. Did this make you want to do weird Christmas activities?
I don't know how much it made me want to do weird Christmas activities, but it kind of made me want to watch people do weird Christmas activities.
So that you could join in later once you got comfortable with them.
Maybe, yeah. I wouldn't mind trying some of the foods. They sounded strange.
Do we need to get on this?
It would be fun. I did have a fleeting thought of it would be fun to try and recreate some of this.
We already watched that type of thing on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah, they reference a dance that he felt went back to like Roman times, which makes sense since Rome definitely put their oar into England. He actually purposefully left out details about food, I think because he didn't want to burden people with the curiosities. And it's like, no, bring it on. I want to know. But little do I realize that was a flourish and it wasn't actually there. I don't know.
There was parts of it that talked a bunch about the food, because you had peacock and or pheasant pie and the boar's head, which I don't think I ever really put two and two together. That song, The Boar's Head, was based on an actual dish.
Oh, I've spent enough time on the historical... I think I was watching a thing on Henry VIII or something, you know?
I mean, I should have thought of it, because, like, you always hear that Christmas song.
But in here, didn't they just sing it without actually having a boar's head?
I think my book had, like, an illustration, so I just assumed they were going to eat it. Maybe they didn't say they were eating it, but I think I saw a picture. And if it wasn't in my book, I saw it online, so I just assumed they were eating a boar's head.
I still remember one of those, I suppose you could call it a British reality show, where you had people who got put in the position of gentry and of servants. And there was this really hardcore butler who's a modern day man, but it was like he was a transplant from the 1800s. And he served his master an actual roast pig or boar head, and his master apparently really had come up to modern times because he was so unsettled by, and this was the thing that actually happened. This wasn't just a story. This was a series that made its way to PBS. I think maybe I would have eaten the pig's cheek If I had, if somebody came to me with a pig head now, I think that's a line I'd be willing to cross.
I mean, I'd eat the cheek before I'd go for other parts of the head.
Yeah. I think maybe I'll just leave it there. Oh, dear.
That's the illustration.
Nice. There was now a pause, as if something was expected, when suddenly the butler entered the hall with some degree of bustle. He was attended by a servant on each side with a large wax light, and bore a silver dish on which was an enormous pig's head, decorated with rosemary, with a lemon in its mouth, which was placed with great formality at the head of the table. The moment this pageant made its appearance, the harper struck up a flourish, at the conclusion of which the young Oxonian, on receiving a hint from the squire, gave with an air of the most comic gravity an old carol, the first verse of which was as follows, and I'm going to make you people read it. Okay. Though prepared to witness many of these little eccentricities from being apprised of the peculiar hobby of mine host, yet I confess the parade with which so odd a dish was introduced somewhat perplexed me until I gathered from the conversation of the squire and the parson that it was meant to represent the bringing in of the boar's head. So they must be differentiating between a pig's head and a boar's head. So there was a swine head. Just kind of like how the peacock pie was actually pheasant. They were working with maybe they were working with what they had or what was convenient, or maybe domestic versus wild.
Oh, maybe.
Maybe that's the point. Feel free to leave a comment if you are, in the nicest sense possible, a know-it-all on these things. Also, if you raise... Well, you're not going to send me meat. I would love to try pork that has been free-ranged. Like out there eating acorns, like in the olden days.
Like Iberico? Is that what it is? The ones that make the, like, super expensive...
I can't remember the name of it now, but they're kind of a reddish pig that the Britons used to have, and they're very good-looking pigs. And they would let them go off and do their thing in the woods for a long time. And it was just, aside from the dying, it's a great life for a pig.
Just remembering that series we watched with Sami and Nasrat, Fat, Salt, Acid, Heat.
Mm-hmm,
and she ate some of the, like, she was, like, had the dead pig, and she ate some of the lard from the pig. Yeah,
and was she saying, Grandma, forgive me, or something? Muslim heritage, not supposed to be... maybe tasty, but that was supposed to be, I don't know.
But those are the pigs I was thinking of when you talked about the free-range pigs eating acorns. I don't remember exactly where that was. Yeah, so if you read the original Winnie the Pooh stories and Piglet likes haycorns, that's what that's, Apparently pigs like acorns. There you go. Washington Irving was friends with Presidents Millard Fillmore and Franklin Pierce. Side note, just definitely recommend reading about his life. And so also note to fellow Longfellow fans, Irving and his grave were commemorated by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in his 1876 poem In the Churchyard at Tarrytown. I love Longfellow, so. Here's a nice little comment about Washington Irving. As George William Curtis noted, there is not a young literary aspirant in the country who, if he ever personally met Irving, did not hear from him the kindest words of sympathy, regard, and encouragement. And some of that may have stemmed from people being such critics of him. Like, I know how it feels to be... I'm just going to give you love here.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of which, Edgar Allan Poe said Irving is much overrated. Blah blah blah. Anyway, you can read about these things as
Did you
well.
say that before or after he went to him for advice?
It says Edgar Allan Poe, on the other hand, felt that Irving should be given credit for being an innovator, but that his writing itself was often unsophisticated. Irving is much overrated, Poe wrote in 1838, and a nice distinction might be drawn between his just and his surreptitious and adventitious reputation, between what is due to the pioneer solely and what to the writer. I'm not sure what the crossover was in that timeline, but as far as I know, he did show him his writing and to get his opinion. This, for me, as somebody who loves Wind in the Willows, this maybe touches on a lot of the spirit of that as well, because even though he is staying with wealthy people, the focus is really not on the wealth, but on shared tradition and the joy of each other's company. On music, he enjoys the robin outside of his window, if I remember correctly, in the morning. These little things that, in the end, are really the stuff of life, a good life. And at the end, he doesn't give himself credit for writing anything really grand, but I didn't memorize it. I would love to read it again. I think trying to stir up good feelings in people with this essay, which he does. Am I missing anything that we should be bringing out here?
There's not really a ton to talk about as far as, like, story goes. Because, like, for the most part, it's really just a description of all of the things that he, as Jeffrey, I'm not sure, Crayon, experienced staying at this manor.
Does everybody remember years ago when Danish hygge was so popular, and if you're mispronouncing it, it looks like hygge or whatever, and I may not even be pronouncing it correctly. But I've been reading about it lately and talking about the importance of candles and being with people and just all of the coziness and community. So if you're a fan of that concept, this book is very much in line with that concept too. So if you like just cozy historical, it's not meant to be over the top. It's not meant to be really scary, or it's it could definitely be life altering, but in a gentle, pleasant way to encourage you to really enjoy simple things and other people. And maybe, if you're like us and you have British heritage, maybe dig a little bit more into that, because English history is cool. No country does everything correctly. Nobody does, and everybody should be able to be proud of where they come from and enjoy the good things from that. So, if anybody had major anti-colonial sentiments arise, I promise you there are good things as well as whatever. I'm sure. Am I explaining too much? If you're like, no, Britain did bad stuff. Well, most people do. Merry Christmas! This definitely seems like a homeschool family book. So if you like to read to each other in your family, I recommend it for that type of thing too.
I was going to say, I felt like I would get more out of this if I was reading it aloud. Because especially at the beginning, I felt kind of bored. Because I read part of it myself, and I had part of it as an audiobook while I was driving. And especially at the beginning, I was kind of bored. But I felt like if I was reading this out loud, I feel like I would get more out of it. Because that has happened to me in the past. Like, if I read something out loud, I feel like it enhances the understanding.
I must have been in the right headspace or something, because the beginning didn't bore me, and that was even with the recording. It's probably just my type of thing.
I think this is... I like this type of thing. I think I would get more out of it as a visual thing. Because, I was wishing that I could see the things that were being described.
That would be fun. See me recommending a Tudor feast as a companion
Mm-hmm.
to this. I kind of want to own this book, honestly. It was a little bit of a squeeze to get the story and the essay in before this podcast, but yeah, I would be happy to revisit it in the future.
Yeah, I think it would be a good thing for anybody who's interested in old-fashioned Christmases to look into. Because I don't think it's something that most people even know exists. I had no idea this book existed.
No.
I probably wouldn't have, except that I was looking into Washington Irving's work and just happened upon this. So it's not one that's very well known, but I think it would be interesting for more people, especially people interested in Christmas history, to look into this book. I think it's well worth the read.
Mm-hmm. I think if you're interested in cultivating simple joy, this is a good one. People need that.
And if you're interested in recreating an old-fashioned Christmas, you can use this as a guidebook.
But don't go shooting people's peacocks and taking them away in the night.
And turning them into pie.
We will not protect you from authorities if you do this. Don't be shooting swans, although it would be interesting to know what one tastes like. Now I want to Google that.
What, the flavor of swans?
Yeah. What does swan taste like? So if the government ever searches my computer searches, they can find, swans have a fishy taste. Although the best ones are fed on oats when they are young. The most common cause of death for swans is electrocution.
What? That's random.
I have no idea, and I'm not the one electrocuting them. Okay, so what does peacock taste like? It's sort of like turkey, but with a bit of a nuttier, richer flavor. Sounds tasty.
I'd eat a peacock.
And then make costumes out of its feathers. Interesting. Swan doesn't sound very good, though.
I mean, I'd try it.
But if it's fishy, I'm not a big fish person.
Just put some tartar sauce on it.
I mean, if you bread anything and fry it.
Fried swan.
One time Martha Stewart made, I think she was using puff pastry, like choux pastry, and she piped out these little heads. She did the whole body, and I think it was a swan. You could tell that they were swans shaped desserts. And I think maybe it had like a scoop of ice cream or something. It was fancy. So if you wanted to have the tastier version of swan, those looked really cool. Oh, that'd be so fancy. Anyway.
I think that's probably all we have to say about Old Christmas. Like I said, the book is more descriptions rather than a narrative. So,
if you want 1800s Christmas that won't scare you, maybe get this.
There's no haunting trying to change someone's heart.
Just to protect the treasure in the church.
Okay, well, we will probably be back for more in the future. So, until next time.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Every Version Ever. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow my co-hosts as well. My Linktree and all of our links will be in the description below. If you want more of my content, all my podcasts are available on YouTube as well as most podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this show, check out one of the other podcasts or check out my Patreon for bonus and extended episodes you won't find anywhere else. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode, so thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.